I just want to thank you guys all, firstly, for coming tonight. What a great turnout. My name is Alexis Wood, and I'm the Events and Corporate Programs Manager here at Academy XI. If you don't already know who we are and what we do, at Academy XI, we offer short, skill-specific courses to companies and individuals looking to skill up. So these courses range from everything from service design and user experience design to virtual reality design and augmented reality design. We also offer boot camps and workshops on these topics, as well as other topics that are of interest and value to our community and network. So tonight we're really excited to have this awesome lineup of panelists here with us tonight. So a huge thank you to you guys for being here, as well as to our wonderful MC. A huge thank you to Haymarket HQ for providing us with this wonderful space. And a big, big thank you to one of our panelists, James, for providing us with the wonderful beer that you guys are all drinking tonight. He is So he is the founder of The Good Beer Co., an Aussie startup social enterprise. So I hope you guys are all liking that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Reese Proudfoot, our wonderful MC for tonight. If you guys can all give him a round of applause.
Cool. Can everyone hear down the back? Put your hands up. Well, how's this going to work? Put your hands up if you can hear. Good. Everyone at the back. Okay. Good. So, my name is Reese Proudfoot. I'm innovation strategist at WWF Australia. We have got an amazing lineup of panelists here tonight, and some really, really interesting things to talk about. So, why are we here? Well, on a global scale, we are dealing with demographic and social change, inequality, urbanisation on a scale never seen before, huge technological breakthroughs, climate disruption and resource scarcity, forced migration and a shift of power from global north to the global south, including the increasing role of China as a global superpower. Rapid advancements in tech are creating opportunities, but also the potential for disruption amongst the biggest brands. Case in point, the rise of Tesla and once mighty car companies are now needing to reorganize themselves as renewable energy and tech companies. We've seen the rise of populism and decreasing trust in traditional institutions like banks, media, the church, and government. But also, we've seen the rise in peer-to-peer trust and the development of the sharing economy. We've also seen the startup community repositioning to take on fake news, job automation, and dodgy politics, and I hope we'll hear a bit more about that a bit later on. For charities, the traditional fundraising markets and strategies have reached saturation point, and non-profits are vying for market share in an increasingly crowded space. But at the same time, more for-purpose brands are emerging than ever before. The lines are increasingly blurred between the non-profit and for-profit sectors, and new business models are emerging with a focus on social impact. So together, these factors present huge opportunities, but also the imperative to experiment with new approaches to how we solve these big problems. Into this space enter the social enterprise, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. But before we kick off, just a quick show of hands. How many people here actually work for a social enterprise at the moment? Your hands up? A few. How many people would like to work for a social enterprise at some stage? Good, a few more. And who thinks they might want to work for a social enterprise but need a little bit more information before they make the jump? 1, 2, 3, a few more. Good. All right, so we've got everyone covered tonight. We have some really special panelists who between them have a huge wealth of experience as change makers and founders of social enterprises. Sally Hill is the founder of experience design and event company Wild One and the driving force behind Purpose, an annual conference that champions positive and purpose-driven business. Tom Dawkins, give us a wave, Tom, is co-founder and CEO of Start Some Good, a crowdfunding platform for social enterprises, non-profits and change makers initiatives globally. Courtney Sanders is the founder of Well Made Clothes, an e-commerce marketplace for responsible fashion, and the editorial director of Catalogue, a women's interest website that covers fashion and culture without fillers or filters. Prashan Paramanathan is the founder and CEO of Chuff.org, which has grown to be one of the largest global crowdfunding platforms for social causes in Australia, the US, Canada, UK, and Europe. And to my left, James Gradgen, the founder of the Good Beer Company, is the Australian startup and social enterprise beer company, and brewer of the Great Barrier beer that we are all drinking tonight. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists. So, stories are at the heart of social enterprises. They are one of the most important tools that social enterprises have. So to kick us off, in lieu of big bios, I kept them short. We're actually going to hear from each of our panelists now on their motivation. Like, what was it that got them involved and, got them motivated to start their social enterprise? What is it that gets them out of bed in the morning, and why do they do what they do? James, would you like to kick us off?
Okay. Can you hear me all right? Great. Well, first things first, thank you for drinking good beer this evening. You are helping the Australian Marine Conservation Society protect our national icons, which is, at a time like now, is really important. Really simply, my motivation comes from two things. One, I've got a background. I started out as working for a trade union back in the UK, as you can tell from my accent. I then went to work for a PR company. I was a journalist for a bit, and then I ended up working in banking and for a big energy company. And then found my way through a corporate and social responsibility role into running a charity in the UK called Environmental Protection UK, which was the UK's oldest environmental charity that started life as the Coal Smoke Abatement Society in 1884. And I had to make 12 out of 15 people redundant and close down a large part of the charity because I took it on at a time when it was really challenging. And I spent 90% of my time chasing money and begging corporates for money and going down the traditional routes to try and fund the really important work that charity did on air pollution. And that really convinced me that there was a better way for good causes and charities and not-for-profits to raise money. I then came to Australia about 6 years ago and through a route of an unsuccessful startup attempt called Energy Saving Social Club in Melbourne, ended up working for a company called PowerShop, which some of you might know, on the startup team there, and long story short, worked with Get Up, the Australian Conservation Foundation, Environment Victoria, to generate customers for PowerShop through a model that basically said switch from AGL, Origin Energy Australia, because they back dirty power, to a company that is doing the right thing on clean energy, which has raised to date about $2 million for those organisations. So I started thinking, well, if you could do it with something as boring as electricity, I don't actually find electricity boring, but I'm going to say it's boring. Surely you could do it with something more interesting like beer. So I got in touch with a company called Finnegan's in the USA that for about 10 years has been funding reverse food trucks that feed homeless people, and have now built their own brewery and employ 150 people, a really big brewery. And one in the UK called Two Fingers that has a charming logo like that funds prostate cancer research. And both of them said, look, we're not coming to Australia, but if there's anywhere in the world where a social enterprise beer company could work, it's here, because there's some kind of perception that we drink a lot of beer and alcohol. And that was the start for me of the journey, I guess, towards setting up the social enterprise that is the Good Beer Company, which is now a year old.
Hi, I'm Prashan. So I started life in the corporate world, lasted all of 10 months, and then moved over to the social sector, where I've been really ever since then. But amongst my group of friends, I'm like the only one. Everyone's like in oil and gas and in banking and in consulting. And so I'm always the kind of weird little non-profit kid in the corner that everyone kind of pats on the head and tells me how rewarding my work must be. Whenever I talk to my friends about what I did, you kind of could see that their eyes glazed over a little bit, because what was going through their head was that guy on the street that kept on harassing them on the way to work. And their whole interaction with charity was really not a great one, which in their mind put charity in this place of being the poor cousin of the corporate world. And that was pretty hard for me, because it was the sector that I wanted to spend my time in. What I kind of came to realize working in the sector was that the main face of charity for people who are not in this whole world is fundraising. And that's the kind of like 90% of the interaction that people have is through kind of fundraising. And if you can change the way that people experience that, from something that feels like being harassed to something that they really enjoy and want to participate in and that's personalised to them. You can not only change, you can not only help a whole bunch of organisations to raise money, but you can change the perspective that people have on the sector and move it from being like the place that I'd go as the second option after I get a real job in the corporate world to like somewhere that's doing really exciting, interesting stuff. And kind of what I really want to do with Chuffed is try to rebrand how people perceive charity. And you can do that, I think, through fundraising.
Thank you. Sally.
Hello, I'm Sally. The question is why? Why did we get involved in this? And I guess for me, it's just about my personal and my environmentalism that has been a value of mine since really early in my life. And I first started exploring that really early. Luckily for me, I didn't actually go down a corporate path, although I tried to later. But I started out working at GetUp, where James also worked or partnered with. And I was kind of exploring my interest in social justice and environmentalism and really digital campaigning. I was really excited by this, what was very new at the time, kind of digital campaigning world. And through that, I realised that I had a really keen interest in corporate social responsibility. Reason being, we worked on this campaign that was just kind of monumental for me. It was the Gunns pulp mill. I don't know whether anyone remembers a pulp mill that was being threatened to be built in, virgin Tasmanian forest. We thought we'd kind of gotten that one over with, but they actually wanted to pulp native forest in Australia, take the pulp to Japan, and then ship it back to Australia as paper. And GetUp's traditional method of campaigning was to lobby the politicians in charge of that decision. At the time, it was Peter Garrett, and there was a huge amount of opposition on the ground, and GetUp was doing its best to lobby Peter Garrett to turn this decision around, but it wasn't working. And we decided to try a slightly different angle on the campaign, which was to actually look at the bank that was funding the pulp mill and run a consumer awareness and shareholder activism campaign against that bank. So rather than going to GetUp members and saying, hey, can you please email your politician or your MP, can you walk into the local branch of this bank or call your bank manager or your mortgage manager and tell them that you don't want your bank funding this mill. And it worked. It was very successful. So the bank pulled funding, and then we took out ads in the Australian Financial Review saying this is a really dodgy investment, no one else should touch it. The Gunns pulp mill got shelved, and it's kind of been permanently abandoned as well, which was really exciting for me as a young campaigner. Yay! So from there, I realised there was this lever, shareholder activism or consumer brand reputation, you could call it as well, and decided I really wanted to go work in corporate social responsibility, work with big brands and kind of turn them around, had this really romantic idea about doing that. Did a couple of years working in London and realised that is actually a very difficult thing to do. I still believe it's a very difficult thing to do, potentially a soul-destroying thing to do. You could spend years and years and years of your life trying to make a really incremental change in a large corporate and kind of burn out your spirit in the meantime, which I've seen a lot of friends in sustainability do. And I also spent some time working at WWF in corporate partnerships, which is another angle on that, of trying to forge partnerships between NGOs and corporates to kind of turn around their supply chains to become more sustainable. And what I saw through these different experiences was that I was really interested not in trying to change the way a huge corporate, baddie, big company, big brand behaves, but which can be rewarding, but it actually is very difficult unless you're going to have a big public sweeping, campaign and sweeping change. And I was really interested in actually supporting new companies that had values, positive values embedded in them from the beginning, and supporting and scaling them to become the big companies of the future. And that's kind of why I ended up starting my own business, because I thought, it was really difficult for me to work inside large companies and try to create the culture change that was necessary. I wanted to actually be outside it, doing it and demonstrating what was possible. And I still to this day have that philosophy in mind when I organise an event like Purpose, where our core audience is startups and social enterprises that we want to support to scale and become the next challengers to those big brands. And we just want the corporates to have so much FOMO that they start and they do, they're really interested in all this stuff, that they then start really waking up and trying to change what they're doing, and then they're motivated to do the change rather than having, some annoying, noisy sustainability campaigner internally trying to get them to do that work. That's where I am now, Wild One, and I run this event called Purpose.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm... Oh, more claps. I'm Courtney. I come from a media background, so I started creating fashion content for radio and the web. The more fashion content I created, the more I realised how problematic the fashion industry was for women in the developed world, particularly in terms of the representation of body image and the nature of fashion advertising. So I started to write a lot about that. Through that and through delving into women's rights in fashion, I kind of started to think, well, if it's bad for women in the developed world, it's probably much worse for women in the developing world. And that was really my into understanding the problems with the fashion industry supply chain and becoming interested in advocating for change in that area. The fashion industry, 75% of garment workers worldwide are women, and they face horrendous human rights violations. So that was where I sort of started. I started covering that a lot and then branching out into other problematic areas of the fashion industry supply chain. Through that content, I met a woman called Kelly, who's in the audience, who runs an ethical sleepwear label and also a fashion advocacy group, and she's had about 10 years experience in ethical fashion, and she really schooled me on the complexities of the fashion industry supply chain at large and the huge environmental and human rights violations. It's the second most polluting industry in the world after oil. Together we sort of started talking about a way in which we could make people aware of the problems and also provide an alternative to fast fashion, which dominates the market and is the main cause of those problems. We had different ideas, but they sort of revolved around the same kind of marketplace-based platform. And at the same time that was happening, that we were meeting and kind of coming up with this idea, I had applied for an innovation in journalism grant from the Walkley Foundation. So Kelly and I kind of sort of cemented the idea, and we proposed that, and we won that, and that was funded by Google. So that kind of gave us all of the mentorship that we needed to launch Well Made Clothes. So now Well Made Clothes does two things. It creates information about the problematic nature of the fashion industry, because I don't think there's a lot of that out there for people at the moment, and then it provides an e-commerce marketplace for people to shop personal values in a transparent way.
And Tom.
Yay. G'day everyone, my name's Tom. I'm the co-founder and CEO of StartSomeGood.com, which is a crowdfunding platform for social change projects globally. I've always been somewhat entrepreneurially inclined. Right from kind of year 9, I got a contract to hand out junk mail for 5 cents a flyer, and then my friend and I got our sisters, who were 2 years younger, to hand it out at 4 cents a flyer, and we stopped handing out junk mail because that's a terrible job, right? So find someone else to do it. I know, I'm sorry. It's so everything about it is terrible. But ultimately, kind of what got me focused, I guess, on social issues was kind of a series of experiences in my late teens, most of which took place some of which, the initial ones took place while on student exchange, living in the States, that kind of confronted me with, I had to kind of re-examine my values. I was confronted by people with very different values from me, and I was fortunate to stumble into a range of youth leadership opportunities, but realised upon reflection just how typically tokenistic and biased towards a very particular type of participation by a very particular type of young person, which is a waspy middle-class kid like me, mostly male, to opinionated, and started thinking really deeply around what does it look like to get more people involved in making a difference? What does it look like to give every person the chance to express themselves on the issues that matter to them, and to be told that their voice matters and that their voice has a role in our democracy? Subsequently, I founded 3 not-for-profits pursuing a variety of different experiments and approaches to engaging my peers around that, the third of which is an organisation that still exists today called VibeWire, which some of you may know. And over the 8 years I led VibeWire, I did a relentless amount of fundraising, and I raised about $1 million over that time. And that was really hard because we were a bunch of kids who hadn't done anything, and we were trying to do things mostly that no one had done. So we had no track record, and the actual approach to making a difference, using media, using digital tools, sending young people out on the campaign trail during the election, holding virtual events, none of them had been tried either. And so breaking through into the traditional kind of funding model for not-for-profit work, getting money off corporates, foundations, and rich people was highly, was really challenging. But the other thing that happened over those 8 years was a bit of a evolution in how we thought about change, from a focus almost entirely on change happens through government, and your job is to understand how government works and how how to make how a law become, how an idea becomes a law, and how to make your voice heard in a democracy, how to, i.e., hassle the politicians to do what you think they ought to do, and instead became, how can you do the thing that you think needs doing? What are the tools at your disposal right now to actually make a difference for your community, for our world? And the end result of that thinking was opening the first co-working space in Australia, a space then called Square One, now called, it's just been rebranded again, hasn't it? Jungle Gym, maybe? I can't keep up, but still with the same mandate now to support young entrepreneurs. And so thinking about entrepreneurship as a tool. I then spent a couple of years in Washington, DC as the first social media director for a global NGO called Ashoka, who actually invented the phrase social entrepreneur about 35 years ago. They were the very first people to kind of identify, or at least to think it was worth describing, this kind of new approach to making a difference that used entrepreneurial approaches, thinking about scale and sustainability and systems. And there I got thinking a lot about what are the blockages in creating innovation. I had certainly struggled with those blockages in gaining funding for unproven approaches, but I only thought about that as kind of my own struggles. What do I need to do today? Why is this so hard? Ashoka gave me the opportunity to kind of pull back and realize that that was a systemic problem within the social change sector writ large, which is we're not very good at funding things that we don't yet know will work. The majority of the funders in the social change world are conservative, by which I don't mean right-wing, I mean risk-averse. They take their work really seriously, they want to get it right, and so they want evidence that the thing they're thinking of funding does in fact work. So we have an extraordinary bias towards funding things that are already proven to work, many of which of course deserve funding, but of course if we had all the answers we wouldn't have all these damn problems. And so we desperately need to be better at funding things that we don't yet know will work, which is to say genuine innovations, social change experiments which can bring about the breakthroughs we need to hopefully actually get ahead of the problems that we face. And in thinking about those issues, I saw crowdfunding as a really powerful tool to actually raise high-risk capital, and thought that Kickstarter was solving a very similar problem to the problem that we wanted to solve. They were solving a problem for creative artists to go around the traditional gatekeepers in their sector, which were record label executives, gallery owners and the like, and we wanted to help social entrepreneurs go around the gatekeepers in our sector, which is government, foundations, corporates and high net worth individuals. Now, ironically, the majority of our work these days is in fact working with those gatekeepers to make their gates more accessible and more effective. But nonetheless, that's how we got started, and that's really important. And that's actually a different starting point from most crowdfunding platforms out there, or most fundraising platforms. Most of those are founded with the premise we need more money for charity. We need to make fundraising cooler or easier, or in some way just get more money into the sector. We're founded with the premise that there's probably enough money out there already, but the challenge in many ways is akin to the challenge of hunger on a planet that has heaps of food, which is that money is poorly distributed and often wasted within the social sector, and in particular it's not distributed towards innovation, and that's what we're focused on, and that's informed how we've set up our site, the work that we do, and even the crowdfunding model we pursue.
Thank you. So we covered a lot of territory then, and thank you for bringing up funding, and I think that's something we're going to come back to a bit later on as well. Very important for all social enterprises. Something else we spoke about then was the origin of the word social enterprise, and how it came about 35 years ago. So it's not a new concept. It's been around. But there are lots of different interpretations of social enterprise. And Sally, I wonder, how would you define social enterprise? How would you personally define a social enterprise? And why do you think that the social enterprise movement has really taken off over the last few years, considering it's been around for such a long time?
Yeah, it's funny because I have noticed there's actually a lot of different names for the similar ideas, and there seems to be kind of a spectrum of organisation types, from the purely profit-driven through to the purely, like trying to be purely social purpose driven. And you can almost plot them on a spectrum. And social enterprises, as I understand them, have really come out of kind of a sector, the charity sector, that is squeezed for funding. And you've seen people who are interested in a social cause, a social mission, try to experiment with revenue models to fund what they're trying to do. And then they've had to start thinking very innovatively about how to do that. And often they're building a business model on top of a social cause. But you also have kind of social enterprise coming from the other direction, where you have businesses that have started out as enterprises, profit-making enterprises, trying to overlay a social mission onto a product, or try to temper the worst aspects of their impact through making their brand slightly more social or sustainable. I personally use the word purpose-driven business quite a lot, because I think about the idea of business as a driver for change, and I feel like if you really want to do that, you need to be discounting the idea of a purely profit-driven business and looking at a business that exists to serve a social purpose at its core, but is doing that in a sustainable way, and is looking at value, a very thick form of value, where you're creating a profit, but you're also creating a dense social value as well. Yeah. That's what I say. And I just think on the emergence of this, I think the thing that is a really huge trend at the moment is kind of codifying the ethics of organisations as they start. So we've seen the rise of B Corps recently, and I think that's really interesting, because really startups are just baby corporates, and ideally I would love to see a lot of the social enterprises that are starting now become the corporates of the future.
Do you want to explain what a B Corp is?
Oh, sorry. So B Corp is a benefit corporation, which is a new form of company, which is a legal entity in some countries, and a certification currently in Australia that's a socially beneficial company. But Prashan actually has a really interesting, totally different model on that. That's a really interesting thing that he might.
Great. Prashan, would you like to share it?
So we started life as a charity, and then hit a point where we wanted to scale very fast. We needed to raise money, and we had already raised about $500,000 in philanthropic grants, and it's a lot easier to get philanthropic money when you're new and shiny, but trying to sell, hey, we're big, we want to be huge, is a pretty hard philanthropic sell. And we might have managed to scrape through another $500,000, but like if we ever wanted to raise like $5 million Series A type of round, it just wasn't ever going to happen in charity fundraising philanthropic land. And so we had to make this decision around like, okay, so we're going to convert our structure. What do we convert into? And in the US and the UK, there are different legal entities that you can become that are not a normal limited liability company, and they're not a charity. They're a separate kind of entity type. We don't really have that in Australia yet. It's kind of been a long process of creating something in Australia. And so we couldn't wait around until the legislation actually came into place. And so we invented our own version of the US Public Benefit Corporation. And the way that we did that is that the way that, I don't know if you know a huge amount about like corporations law in Australia, but your obligation as a director of a company is to act in the best interest of the company. Now, over the course of the last however many years, that's come to mean the financial interests of the shareholders, but we think that that's not the real understanding of what is in the best interest of the company. And we took the view that considering other stakeholders and the environment and staff in your decision around making a judgment around what is in the best interest of the company is the right interpretation. It's a little bit of like legal mind bending to make that work, but it allowed us to create an entity that's essentially purpose locked. And so to change, we have a stated social purpose in our constitution. To change that, you need 100% shareholder vote, which means that regardless of whose money we take, as long as there is the founders in the shareholding, we can always hold the directors to account. And what we found, which was quite weird and strange, having both been a charity and a social benefit company, is that the social benefit company actually allows you to hold onto your purpose better than a charity does, which is like kind of extraordinary when you think about it, because that is definitely true, because we used to be a charity and we rolled out of a charity structure. And if you are, I can tell you multiple ways of being able to do that. And if you are able to do that, it's not like, it doesn't, like the structure itself doesn't necessarily hold you in the way that like the general perception of what a charity is. So like the new structure, it'll be great like when there's actually a proper legal entity, because it's in super grey legal territory. And we can do that because it's just us and our investors. But no lawyer is going to recommend that you do something in super grey legal territory. They're going to wait until the legislation is passed and you can go to a defined structure.
Thank you. So, I mean, clearly there's a lot that needs to go into starting a social enterprise and understanding the legal frameworks and the logistics of doing so. Who here has an idea that they are wanting to take into a social enterprise? Or put your hands up if you've got an idea that you're wanting to get up in the near future. Okay. So, James, you've recently been through this process. Like, you've had an idea, you've been excited about it, and now you've turned that idea into, well, you've executed on that idea. Where do you even start? Where do you, when you're sitting with that beer, and was it a beer that you were sitting with when you had the idea?
All the best things happen with a beer.
Okay.
Start with a beer.
Exactly. So, incidentally, Earth Hour, which is a campaign we run, started with a beer as well. Like, everything starts with beer. So you were sitting there with your beer. Where do you start? How do you put that first step?
Look, I think it's about not being afraid to go out there and have a look at what's happening and who you can learn from, and to connect with people. In my case, the two beer companies that I talked about that were already doing what we're doing, which is that social enterprise model, and then to just kind of kick the tires a bit in terms of, is this feasible? Are there people that will support it? So, I mean, if I was speaking from the example of the Good Beer Company, that was about finding a charity that was willing to partner with an alcohol brand, which was challenging. And then it was about finding a brewer that was willing to brew beer for us, because it was a totally new concept. And then it was about having conversations which kind of touch on what we were just talking about, which is having... I've just had there's no one from Woolworths here, is there? No? Okay. I just had a meeting with Woolworths earlier on. We've been all of the BWS Dan Murphy's stores soon in Queensland, and they don't really understand what social enterprise is, and so it's taken a lot for me to get the better payment terms and the better price that we've got to make the Good Beer Co viable. But to answer your question, I think it's really about getting as much information as you can at the beginning of that process that gives you the confidence to go ahead and do it. And then you've just got to really, kind of just close your eyes and jump in. And in our case, I launched the Good Beer Co with a crowdfund campaign. Unfortunately, not with either of these two crowdfund sites, although I have worked with Start Some Good. I worked with a crowdfund site that was not purpose-driven. But I think once you're out there and you've taken that first step, then it's really about making sure that you surround yourself with people who are going to encourage you, are going to support you, people who have experience that you don't have, know what you don't know, which in my case is quite a lot, and just make sure that you can keep going. And I think I'd encourage people to go for it, but just also realise that, particularly if you're doing what I'm doing, which is to do it on your own, if you can find co-founders and people that you can work with, that's a great thing. But I definitely encourage you to go for it. I don't know if that's a helpful answer, but that's certainly from my experience.
Definitely. Courtney, you do have a co-founder. What was your experience?
It was awesome. So far, so good. We're only 1 year in, but pretty good so far. So we were... I was quite lucky from the beginning. Well, I guess like from the beginning of this project I was lucky, but also like I think Kelly and I had also like tried other things in the area of what we wanted to do. Like I'd tried vague e-commerce marketplaces and affiliate programs that had terrible technology behind them and didn't really understand what they were trying to do, and they failed. And you know, Kelly similarly, although less failures, in the ethical fashion realm. And when we had like a lot of learnings going into this project. I think then both of our skills complemented each other. So I came from the content and marketing background, and Kelly came from the ethics background. So she was able to like develop a really rigid and thorough ethical framework that is the kind of heart of well-made clothes, and where our sort of industry respect and transparency kind of comes from. And I was able to kind of push that out there in a way that people could understand really easily, because it's a complex issue. And then I think we were also like sort of doubly lucky in that and I like grants and innovation like programs and stuff, there's so many. And like I actually had a friend who was just like, fill out this thing, it's for this innovation thing, just fill it out. And I was like, cool, yeah. And like I filled it out, I really had no idea what it was. And once we got into the, I know it's so embarrassing, but I'm a New Zealander, I don't know these things. He was like, the Walkleys Foundation. I was like, what? So embarrassing. Anyway, we got into the second round and obviously started to take it much more seriously. And when we won, we got connected to a whole lot of people who could really mentor us through the process. So from the content end, we have an editor, one of the editors of The Australian mentors us through the content to make sure that we're creating quality content. And from the technology background, we got mentorship from Google. I don't know if you've ever tried to create a tech thing, but if you are not a coder or don't have any experience and you send a brief out to tech companies, what you get back, you're like, I don't understand it, or like, is that too much money, or is this the right solution? Because our site is built on the back-end technology. So we were really lucky to be able to go to Google and be like, here are these 5 things that have been presented to us. What is actually the best case technology for us? And like, we were super lucky that we had all of that sort of presented to us more easily necessarily than other startups. But I also think that it is out there as well. Like I think that you can like ask for help from those people, and they're often like way more willing to help than you think they would be. Which I know sounds like really like naive advice, but it's actually super true. It sounds like that thing that your teacher says. It's like, just ask for help. But like, I think those people actually will help.
Yeah, and there's a lot of support out there for startups at the moment. Sticking with this kind of early stage area, Sally, you do a lot of work through the Purpose Conference. You come into a lot of contact with startups and social entrepreneurs. And in fact, this is a question for the whole panel, whoever would like to answer it. What are some of the common mistakes that you see some early stage startups or social entrepreneurs making, and what would be your advice for people on how to overcome some of those mistakes?
Yeah, one of the things I see really often is people being very, very passionate about an issue, but very, very amateurish about the execution of whatever it is they want to do. And I think that one thing that the sector needs is really a culture of being exceptional at the skill or the craft that you need to do in order to be able to work through your problem and work through like the proposed solution. And it's, we're not really operating in a sector. There's no, I keep saying sector, but it's not really a social enterprise sector as such, because the social enterprises that we talk about are competing in the mainstream market for people's attention and money. And so you need to be exceptional on so many levels. It will get you so far to say that there's this cause and you can measure your impact, and there's a nice, a nice added piece of value there, or a story to your brand. But actually, I don't think people are going to choose your product over another unless it's exceptional. You have to be really, really good at what you do. And I think that's great, because most of us find it rewarding anyway to be working on things that are really high quality, working with really smart people. But I just think that a lot of time and energy is wasted, and there's this theme of burnout in the social enterprise sector as well. I think that we need to not have as much time for lovely ideas that are poorly executed. I know it sounds really harsh, but I think that we just, as people, need to not waste our time doing things that are not great, and not pour energy into something that isn't going to be really, really stand out and cut through. And that's when you have those cut through social enterprises, they are remarkable because there's an incredible brand story there. They are making an incredible amount of impact. And often there's a lot of innovation that comes out of the necessity of working in a constrained environment. And some examples I really love are like Who Gives a Crap. I think one of those innovative companies out there, and they're also a social enterprise. And they're kind of tutoring young social enterprises in Australia now around how they started and what were the conditions for that speed of innovation that they were doing at the start and are still doing. Yeah.
And they get a different graphic designer to do the things.
Yeah. And that was designed in from the start. So they hired really one of their hiring strategies is to hire. I don't even know if this is working. To hire McKinsey.
Can everyone hear down the back? Wave your hands if you can't really hear.
But,
all right. Do you want to use this one?
Yeah. So they have a strategy around recruiting McKinsey, people who are accepted into McKinsey's grad program. They actually contact them and try to poach them, and they often can because they have a really more interesting place to work than McKinsey. And they pay six-figure salaries to most of the people in the company. And that's a huge risk to do as a startup social enterprise, but it pays off quickly because of the growth that they've seen, because of how different they are. But yeah, the subscription model toilet paper is innovative and remarkable in itself, and then to have that story of the brand and the impact that they're having is really great. So they're just killing it.
Great. Don't do lovely things that are poorly executed. Great line. Anyone else? Who else has examples of common mistakes that early stage social enterprises could make? Lots?
You probably see a million things in a day.
I mean, so much I think is a matter of timing, and this may sound really unhelpful, but people are often both either too early or too late for a variety of things. People are often too late to get started on their project. They agonize over it, particularly if that's combined with a slightly secretive concern with your brilliant idea and everyone's about to steal it. But people are often slightly too early with their crowdfunding before they have sufficient evidence that they are the right people, that they can deliver an exceptional result, because they think that their brilliant idea is enough. And we see this all the time, particularly with things like apps. You cannot raise money for an app just based on your app idea. It does not matter how brilliant, because we all know now that a brilliant idea is nowhere near enough. It needs to be brilliantly usable as well, or we won't use it, and what's the point? So the minimum now required to do a decent crowdfunding campaign for an app is mock-ups, preferably a clickable demo in your video. Because otherwise, there's no way, we have no reassurance that there is going to be a brilliant execution to go along with even a brilliant idea. But I also think people often pivot too soon. There's a bit of a fetishization of the pivot within the general startup sector as the kind of really sophisticated lean startup thing to do. But but the people who make a real difference are often like the bands who drive around in their van for 3 years and then suddenly blow up and everyone's like, can't believe you're such an overnight sensation. There are so many companies like that as well, and I think resilience is one of the great entrepreneurial skills. You have to be exceptionally resilient as well. In amongst the other things you need to be exceptional at, you have to be exceptionally resilient. Because if you're going to start a social enterprise, you should accept from the start that you're doing two of the hardest things imaginable together. Starting a successful business is incredibly challenging, and most fail who are just trying to do the simple thing of exchanging a good or service for money. But if you also actually want to make a meaningful dent on the world and change some genuinely entrenched social issue, well, the majority of attempts to do that fail as well. And you're going to try and do both of them together. So you have to give yourself time. One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard was people think a lot about what's your minimum viable product. If you guys are familiar with that phrase, I think you also need to think about what's your minimum viable life.
Do you want to explain, just for people who may not have heard it before?
Your minimum viable product is the minimum product required to test your premise that people want the product. So for instance, a crowdfunding campaign is often a minimum viable product. Don't actually manufacture the thing, mock up the thing, design the thing so you can show it to us, and then sell it. And only if you can sell it, then you actually manufacture it. So the crowdfunding campaign is like an MVP of the real product. But I think you need to think a lot about your minimum viable life and be really realistic about that. If you're used to a McKinsey salary, don't think, well, I'm going to leap into my social enterprise and I'm going to be earning that salary again in 3 months. Because you're almost certainly not going to be, and you'll be setting yourself up for failure. Instead, think, what can I do? How long can I last? Where do I need to get to over the coming 12 months? And set some really, really realistic milestones for yourself along the way.
Thanks. Sticking on the crowdfunding fundraising topic, the recent rise of impact investing as
rise is kind of a strong word.
The fluency among people outside of the finance sector of impact investing as a method for change and bringing people who may not have traditionally been involved in social change to engage with the social change sector is a topic for discussion. But I'm also interested in as an early stage social entrepreneur who is thinking about ways to get funded, or in fact doesn't even necessarily want to start a social enterprise, may just think, I want to create this change. What is the best way that I can engage with capital to do that? Like, how should someone decide on crowdfunding, venture capital, angel investors, impact investing? How can someone go about making those decisions and finding the best information? Prashant?
There's like 7 questions in there, but let me try and pull out a couple. Like, I take a pretty brutal, like, commercial approach to like thinking about it, and I don't think it's really any different in social enterprise land as it is in any startup business or early stage business land. So if you can get free money, I would get the free money. Like, I think that's kind of no-brainer. That's what we did initially. Like, and it's a really good testing ground. I mean, obviously, like, philanthropic money comes with tags, and depending on who you get the money from, those tags can be more onerous than others. But we were lucky that we got money from people that were very hands-off, trusted us to get on with the job. Then, like, when we went out raising capital, like equity capital, we talked to a whole bunch of different impact investment funds and commercial tech VC funds. And the really, like, I don't know, interesting and sad, maybe disappointing thing for me was that we found that the tech VC funds were more aligned with what we wanted to do than the impact investment funds were. Which sounds kind of strange and weird, but the reason for that is the tech VCs that we talk to and that we eventually end up raising money from, their time horizon. So when I talk to our investors now, the time horizon was like, we want to invest in people who don't want to sell. Right? Like, that this is your life's work, that you are kind of fully committed to this. And we'll connect you with other people who are in the same situation as you, who are trying to grow like tech startups and who have been successful at doing that. The proposition from Impact Investment Fund was like, I want like an 8% return next year. And like the reason for that was that there are these, like, a lot of the funds in Australia, and this is different kind of globally. I think in the UK there's a lot more different types of capital, but a lot of the funds in Australia were targeted towards slow, steady growth, cash flow type of businesses that had 10 years of cash flow history, could probably get a loan from a bank, and could deliver the returns quite quickly. And the stage of the market that we're at, they are taking pretty safe bets so that they can return a sensible return to the fund and prove out the industry. And I don't think there's like a huge amount of impact investment capital that is there for high risk, high return type, high growth types of ventures in Australia. Elsewhere in the world, that definitely exists. But in Australia, I think we're just like pretty early on in the market.
Tom?
Yeah, just what I wanted to say about that is it's so interesting how that's repeating exactly the same biases of the philanthropic funding sector, a desperate desire to minimize risk as close to zero as possible, and therefore to trade incremental and frankly completely inadequate social returns versus the possibility of the breakthrough, high scalable social returns that we actually need. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that you found a more receptive audience in the mainstream tech investors, because they think of risk completely differently. They're playing a completely different game. They're not trying to win each deal. They're trying to win the portfolio. And that's the tragedy of what gets called impact investing in Australia at the moment, is that they're so desperate to prove that it's not throwing your money away and that you do earn a return, kind of fearful that one failed deal will destroy the entire nascent industry and prove to people that there's no such thing as impact investment that produces economic returns, that they're not investing in the stuff that could actually produce really impressive economic returns as well as really impressive social returns. Some are trying though. We actually have an interesting little partnership with a group called Social Enterprise Finance Australia, CEFA, and they have the tagline of innovative lending, and their challenge has always been that they don't do any innovative lending. They do very traditional lending based on very traditional lending criteria, which is to say they preferably want you to have a capital asset, a building, thank you, and then they'll lend you money. But just as Prashant said, you could walk into a bank and get a loan if you have a building to put up as collateral. But they know this, and they want to do better, and they've been thinking a lot about it. And so we've partnered to offer this blended finance model whereby they provide about 3/4 of the money as a loan, but only if you raise the additional quarter through a crowdfunding campaign with us. And in so doing, prove that there's community interest, prove that there's early adopters, prove that there's kind of the basis upon which you can grow into the future, and thereby actually through the act of evidencing that support, de-risking the deal for them.
Great. I'm going to throw it open to some questions in a couple of minutes, but before I do so, I just want one more question about impact and measuring impact. And social enterprises are based on passion and the desire to do good. Sally, how does a social enterprise, or how do social enterprises measure their impact and make sure that they are doing good?
I'm actually not an expert on social impact or social return on investment at all. I don't want to throw the question in a totally different direction, but one of the things I think is most interesting that's going on at the moment is the conversation around new forms of capital that are like social capital and actually measuring it, but also natural capital, human capital, creative capital, and information capital. And there's an amazing book called Six Capitals by an Australian author who's investigating this and is working with some of the largest accounting firms around the world because they want to actually be seen as the leaders in how to measure these new forms of capital. And that's where that kind of social capital measurement and impact conversation I think is really interesting. I think I'd want to throw it to someone else. I'm not really an expert on social impact measurement.
Anyone else have anything to contribute?
I'm not an expert on it either, but obviously we need to demonstrate the impact of the beer that you're drinking and the other beers that we'll brew, not just to you as beer drinkers, but obviously to all the organisations that are going to stock it across Australia and hopefully on export market that we're looking at now as well. And for me, I look at, say, Thank You Group. I think they've got it right. I think the way that they do that in all of their product range is phenomenal. It's a level of detail that perhaps your average consumer that's buying their products in, say, their local Coles perhaps don't go into. But it's incredibly important in terms of their integrity. But I could also think of examples of, I'll give you one example from the UK, Innocent Smoothies, who were a company that some of you might be aware of, who were the first people to produce smoothies directly from fresh fruit rather than the kind of pulped stuff that was pretty disgusting. And I think, I could be completely wrong there, about 50% owned by McDonald's, but they started out with a very clear purpose-driven agenda. They were going to give 10% of their profits back, and it turned out over a period of 4 years that they hadn't actually given any of their profits back, and so their integrity was very badly damaged, and they hadn't locked into their structure, I think, that profit for a purpose mission. They're a 10-year-old company now, But what that did was to damage the integrity of, I guess, all of the other people in that sector. So it's incredibly important that that this stuff is done well. But I think it's, speaking as someone who's kind of starting out in this space, other than going and doing what I did, which is to sit down with the guys from Thank You, to sit down with the guys from Who Gives a Crap, to sit down with some of the amazing people that Sally has at her events and conferences and that are on these two crowdfunding platforms and have a conversation with about how they did it. I think the key thing is actually thinking about it from the point of view of how are the people that are buying your product and service, if it's a product and service like beer, for example, going to understand this, and how is it going to have a meaningful impact in terms of how they feel about that product and service, and is it real in terms of the impact?
So I used to get paid a lot of money to do impact measurement for many years, which made me very cynical about impact measurement. So one of the main things that is important about impact measurement is it needs to start moving from being about proving to improving. And so the reason that like a lot of people hired us, or the firm that I used to work for, to do impact measurement is I need a big report with like a trusted brand on it that I can whack in front of a funder and get money. So it's like I can prove my program works, and I can take it to government, or I can take it to a philanthropic fund to get money. And where it really needed to get to was like, this helps me create a framework that I can use to improve the impact that I'm making. The positive thing that I think comes out of things like B Corp and other frameworks around social enterprises is that they're baking in the impact measurement practice into the structure. And I think that will force people to actually do the impact measurement, and if they're having to report back on it and their brand is tied into that, then that will kind of start that improvement process, because you want to see that number, whatever it is that you end up with, going up year on year. And the fact that it's baked into your structure kind of drives you to do that.
Cool. So we've got about 15 minutes for questions. If you want to raise your hand and speak with a loud projected voice so everyone can hear you. Does anyone have any questions for the panel? Yeah, at the back there.
Yeah, so obviously we've got groups such as like Lowe's or Street or Who Gives a Crap, we've got these very different naming conventions between the regular businesses. Is this just something as part of the new aspect of social?
Hang on, trying to use it.
G'day. So obviously we've got these groups such as Who Gives a Crap and Start Some Good, and they're very focused on that name, so it's that instant recognition from the consumer. Is this something that's a short-term spike, or is it going to be a continued thing within the social enterprise space of trying to communicate instantly to the consumer what you're trying to do?
Who wants to take that one on?
I used to make clothes as well, didn't you, originally?
I mean, I just think that that's a basic good branding exercise. I don't think that that exists within the social enterprise, exists exclusively within the social enterprise space. I think that if you want to have a startup company that's easily understood, you should create a name that is like fast, effective, and easily sort of remembered, regardless of whether you're trying to do good or not. Sorry, that was pretty blunt, but like, to me it's just kind of like get a name that sticks, you know?
I will say that I think it's a major trend that consumers are looking for companies that are providing more ethical and sustainable options, and that needs to be signalled in a variety of ways. Sometimes that's the name, and sometimes, of course, those names are not to be trusted. But also things like B Corp, you know, are not really solving any sort of a problem for the B Corps themselves, other than that they help people identify us in the marketplace. And so that's only as useful as the demand for that. And so B Corp is a response now to demand from consumers to better identify, just as fair trade was, just as, you know, Rainforest Alliance coffee and all the rest of it. All these sorts of different signalling mechanisms are a response to consumer demands. And the B Corp process is non-trivial. And how many companies are there now? 2,500 globally? We wouldn't be doing it if it didn't actually help solve a problem and provide some value in the marketplace.
Anyone else on the panel? No? Great. Other questions? Yeah? Yeah.
Hi guys, thanks for taking the time this evening to share your experiences. Kind of a controversial, maybe not controversial, but kind of a strange question. Charity fatigue. I think there's a lot of really great missions, and I think as kind of an everyday person, sometimes it can be a bit exhausting keeping up with where I should be focusing my attention. So I'd actually like to ask you guys, because you're kind of, there's a bit of overlap. You're all vying for our attention and sometimes our funds. Do you guys have any strategies in place in terms of how you approach dealing with a phenomenon such as charity fatigue?
Just really quickly, then I'll hand over. I really believe in the power of positive, not negative stories. And that is actually, goes against, if all you care about is raising money once, generally pulling on more negative emotions is more effective, so tragedy or anger, outrage. But I think those are the things that are fatiguing. No one gets inspiration fatigue. No one's ever like, oh man, I heard like so many inspiring stories today. I am over inspiring stories. I can't do any inspiring stories tomorrow. I am at capacity for inspiration. No one ever says that. But literally you do get exhausted, like just in a purely physiological way from being made to feel sad or angry all the time. And so I really believe one of the great things we did early in our life was we switched the language that we got people to respond to in the prompts when building campaigns from what is the problem you are responding to and what is your solution, which pretends that there's this black and white world with problems and neat solutions and all the rest of it. But we switched it to what is the future you are creating, how are you creating it? And that's such a more positive, future-focused way of talking about the work that you're doing. And we noticed a really different response to that.
I do have like a note on that though, because I think, we know from like the Good News Internet and all of those kind of studies that people would prefer to hear and read good news than bad news. But I think if you are dealing with an issue that is incredibly complex and has bad things about it, it's also really important that you communicate the bad things as well. I think you have to give like a really thorough and full overview, even if it's difficult to communicate. Like we really struggle with the language that we use to discuss some of the like devastating circumstances in the fashion industry supply chain, but we do think it's our responsibility to point those out, as well as the wins and the positive innovations in the fashion industry, because I think people deserve a full picture of that industry. And I think if you just constantly go, hey, things are great, here are all of the positive things, it's not helpful in the long run, potentially. It's a balance. Balance, yeah.
I would just say on that one that I think it's really interesting because a panelist who didn't end up here tonight kind of raised this idea that if you're a social enterprise, you have two jobs. You have to sell your product, but then you have to create the cultural change and awareness of an issue in order to get people to care enough to buy the product. But I think you could probably see that differently, and maybe I think some of the smartest companies out there are just observing big mega trends in awareness, consciousness, people's kind of shifts and attitudes shifting over time. And one of the big ones is health, wellness, food. So that's been a really long thing that's happening, but it's kind of peaking at the moment. And there's so many food companies capitalizing on that. And I was just over in Sweden in September of last year and met this amazing company called Oatly, who are making oat milk, and they are selling it all over Europe. And you would think that the whole like people turning away from dairy thing was kind of done, and maybe that's charity fatigue, like, oh, dairy is really bad for you, and oh my god, soy is really bad for you too, and almond milk's the worst. But they just like nailed that niche, and they actually, I guess they made an assumption if someone cares about dairy, they're going to go the next step to think soy is really bad, almond's really bad. Apparently oat milk is best, according to these guys, but they're selling oat milk all over Europe now, and it's just, I don't think you need to see it as a bad thing. You can see it as an opportunity. You don't necessarily have to foster that awareness. You don't have to hit people over the head with the negative, but maybe if you rather observe general trends in awareness, consciousness, attitude shift, and try to think about how a product might land in that trend, that's maybe a positive way to look at it.
I think there was one at the back there before.
Yeah, the guy at the front's got the mic and it's been for ages.
Tom, you were mentioning about people trying to crowdfund apps way too early.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you could share an insight about, I guess, the biggest train wreck in that area that you've seen. There's probably too many to talk about, but what the best one was would be more important, I guess, or some best practice examples, I guess.
I mean, if you really want to see crowdfunding train wrecks, go to Indiegogo and then sort by less than a week to go and less than 1% raised, and you'll see a sea of very sad campaigns of people who don't really understand how crowdfunding works, and that's generally the train wreck. This is one of the funny things. No one sees train wrecks because the train wreck is to not be noticed. It's not like you have this spectacular, a campaign goes into the wall and it's this epic disaster that everyone's aware of, and oh my god, did you see that guy's terrible failed crowdfunding campaign? No, failed crowdfunding campaigns, no one sees them. That's why they've failed. And successful campaigns are the ones that are good at getting shared and good at getting people to see them. And this is what leads in general to why we have so many crowdfunding failures, because failure is quiet and success is loud, which leads to a total misunderstanding as to the proportions of each. And if you see 90% success stories in crowdfunding, as you will typically do, because they're the ones that come across your radar, the ones that you want to click on, they're the interesting ones, the ones that are shareable, then you may well believe that, well, this is easy. Everyone succeeds at crowdfunding. I've never seen a failed campaign. But it's actually an epic sea of failure, with over 80% of all crowdfunding campaigns failing to reach their goal, and very few platforms with, reasonable success rates. Although that said, to put that in context, of course, most grant application success rates much lower than that. Pitching to a VC success rates much lower than that. Pitching to a high net worth individual success rates much lower than that. So 20% is respectable, to be honest. But yeah, people fail by thinking it's not their job to campaign, thinking that it's like Uber, that you simply put it on the platform and the donors just pop onto your screen and shower you with money. But it's not like that at all. It's more like launching a blog or wanting to have a YouTube channel. You better get out there and share that thing, or else no one's going to notice.
Could I just say that I've done 2 crowdfunding campaigns. The first one was on Indiegogo, and we did hit our target, but it's fucking hard, and it's very time consuming, and it can be really soul destroying at times as well.
A little too strong.
For God's sake, do not enter into it, thinking it's going to be easy, because it's not. It's really hard work.
But the reward is that it does multiple jobs for you. When you just pitch to a VC or borrow money from a bank or get a grant, all you've got is cash. But a crowdfunding campaign builds a community around your project that is then expressed in the form of money. But it's that community is the real asset, not the money. The money is just a symptom of the community that you've created, and it's the community that is the asset that carries you forward and that you need for your future success. And so crowdfunding builds a much tighter relationship amongst your supporters, because it is a community activity and community success when you do reach your goal.
I think we had a question down the back.
Yeah. Hi, and thanks to the panelists. This is a question, I guess, for everyone, but how have you applied human-centered design or design thinking to what you do?
It's a good question. So the question was, how have you applied human-centered design or design thinking to your organisations, products?
I think, I think we all do. We're all, I guess, that's part of the reason why our various enterprises are working. But for me, so Wild One, my business, we experienced designers specialising in event design, but our whole business, basically our proposition is that we apply UX and human-centered design principles to real-world experiences and events. And we got really good at that before launching our own event that we really care about, which is Purpose. But yeah, so we just observed that human-centered design wasn't really being leveraged for social change, campaigning, community building in the way that I'd been taught to do it in places like GetUp and WWF. So experimented with using that with events, and now we're going to use it a little bit more broadly around the sort of holistic look at experience, whether that's event or brand or communications or other touch points you might have with audiences around social change. So yeah, it's pretty much integral to everything that we do.
Anyone else? No? Another question. Yeah. Yep.
You can just try and talk. Is that loud enough? So thank you to all the panel. It's a question for anyone who wants to take it. Do you think there's a really big one? Sorry. Do you think there's a risk in the rise of social enterprises that we're seeing more goods and services that are kind of being put out into the market, that consumers start to think that by supporting them, they're doing all the good that they need to do to actually see the change that they want to see? Whereas, you know, there might be a gap between actually just buying your Thank You water or your Tom shoes and actually seeing systemic change, which is probably what we kind of need. So anyone who wants to take that question?
Purpose wash, greenwash.
Yeah, greenwash.
Who wants to take that one on?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think this is why I think definition debates around social enterprise aren't very helpful, because it pretends that you are or you aren't. And what we don't just need is more social enterprises, but better social enterprises. And in general, we need to keep pushing every enterprise towards greater engagement with the true impacts of their work, of their whatever, you know, their good or service, and creating more positive impacts, fewer negative impacts, etc. And I'm fascinated by the Thank You water example, and James using them as an example of good impact measurements, because I think the impact measurement is woeful. It acts as if the act of buying bottled water has zero social impact, and the act of offering a supposedly social version doesn't change the contours of the bottled water market, as if it's a static thing from which you can just win market share. But of course, I think there are people out there who give themselves permission to buy bottled water who wouldn't otherwise bottled water, because this is the good bottled water. And the truth of the matter is there is no such thing as good bottled water. It's better than the other bottled water. If you are dying of thirst and you need to buy bottled water, absolutely buy Thank You water. It's more. But if you can do anything to avoid buying that bottled water at all, you have done a better thing for the world than choosing Thank You water over non-Thank You water. And the truth of the matter is we cannot consume our way to a more equal world here in the West. And I think there is a danger in social enterprises whose only social impact isn't doing business better, but is just transitioning the profits. Because if nothing else, it maintains this bifurcated view that the only job of business is to maximize profits, and the only person whose job it is to deal with the real complexity of social change is charities. And Thank You Water is enforcing that dichotomy by saying we're just the profit engine, and then we give all the profits away to these people over here so they can deal with the hard work of social change. And I think we need to actually take on that hard work in our businesses and create businesses that are capable of changing the way we make our money, not just what we do with our money after the fact.
Just from the perspective of consumer trends and the idea of greenwashing, it's massive in fashion. Greenwashing is so you find companies like H&M creating green lines or promoting organic cotton when they're one of the biggest producers and therefore wasters of product in the world. But we've only been live for 1 year, and even in that short amount of time, we've really noticed our customers and our readers asking much more nuanced questions. I think obviously all social enterprise companies have a responsibility to be actually doing what they say they are doing and not greenwashing. But I think consumers and customers very quickly are getting much smarter at asking the hard, nuanced questions and digging into these topics. We've noticed so quickly that customer knowledge and reader knowledge is just gone mental, and that I think suggests that there's so much more information out there for people to consume, and people are actively consuming it, which I think is exciting because ultimately it's customers that are going to keep businesses accountable.
Anyone else? Cool. We've run out of time, but I'm going to ask one last really quick question, and this is the nerd out, geek out question. What is it that really excites you about the social enterprise space? What is a trend? We'll have to try and keep this pretty quick. What is a trend or a development that really excites you that about the social enterprise space in Australia or globally? Who'd like to kick us off?
I'll do it really, really quickly. I don't know if this is working. I think that social enterprise and purpose-driven businesses, and that includes businesses that are making that transition, can move much more quickly. There's politics moves far too slowly in Australia and in the rest of the world. the not-for-profit sector isn't really equipped to take on the big challenges that we face in the world, and I think that's what excites me about social enterprise. But as everyone's been saying today, and I agree with what you said about thank you, we need to be really serious about this. We need to be big. We need to be having a really big impact, and that means we need really good people working inside those organisations, and we need to support them to grow.
What I think will change like business, and I think business and corporates are an important structure that we have in society, is pincering on three things: capital that funds the business, staff that kind of run the business, and customers. And what I'm seeing is that all three of those pincers are now moving in unison to the same beat. Customers are demanding more social impact, and they care about where they're buying stuff. Staff are demanding more purpose in their job, and slowly the capital is kind of catching up to thinking at least about what impact it's making. And I think if we can kind of move those three things in unison, then you'll see like a tipping point in how companies across the spectrum behave.
This is with specific regards to the fashion industry, but I am really excited about the fact that sort of responsible fashion is becoming so necessary in the consumer market that big brands are having to invest in research and development to like fundamentally innovate the fashion industry supply chain, and I think there are incredibly exciting things happening in that space at the moment, which is really cool.
I'm really interested at the moment in ethical tech, and I'm not talking about like Apple's supply chain, although that's the whole thing. I'm talking about people who are designing technology, infusing that technology with ethics and values. And I'm thinking about technology that's designed to be very, very addictive, like the endless scroll and the human impact of that we haven't even really begun to look at yet. And also the role that tech companies have played in big political events recently. And Google and Facebook's policy teams are scrambling to come up with answers to how to respond to the ways their platforms are being used and the role that they've played in things like the outcome of the US election. I think that's a really interesting area, because so far they've just been like, oh, we're just the platform, there's no need to have any kind of code of conduct even to think about it, but I think that's changing pretty quickly.
I'm excited about a future price on carbon that would shift the playing field in favour of all the social businesses that have already designed to be low impact. And I think that's when social enterprise thinking will cease to be a tactical advantage and become a deep systemic advantage. And then I look forward to the phrase social enterprise disappearing completely, because it becomes such an expectation that it's no longer exceptional, and we focus a lot more on antisocial businesses as the exception rather than just social businesses. I also want to say just quickly that I quite like the Thank You Group hand washers. They're a nice product that I use that are no parabens and like quite a good product in its own right. But I'm excited about seeing the rise of better, more thoughtful social enterprises as well. I feel like we're kind of moving into phase 3 of social enterprise. I think phase 1 was the you ought to sacrifice to do the right thing phase. So my product is not as exceptional or not as convenient, often more expensive, but better for the world, so you should deal with those things. Phase 2.0 is that it's as convenient, that it's thank you water there on the shelf, right, in the 7-Eleven, right alongside the others, at an equal price, in fact cheaper usually. It's usually the cheapest water there. Or beer that's every bit as delicious. James would tell you it has to be good beer to be good beer. If it's not good beer, no one's going to buy it, even if it's good beer. And so I think that's 2.0, and I think 3.0 is a deeper engagement with some of these more complicated issues. And part of that, I think, is education. And you hear people talk a lot about how a lot of social entrepreneurs, and I'm an example of this for sure, are from the not-for-profit sector and come in with maybe a lack of like hardcore business skills. But I think the one that we don't talk about as much, but which is equally true, is people coming from the business side, but without a lot of understanding of the issues they want to address, and therefore not a very thoughtful kind of take on negative externalities and true cost accounting of their business impacts. And part of that, I think, is that we need to have kind of more robust education on both. We need social entrepreneurs to both get better business skills, but also better how to identify problems and how to solve problem skills. And that's why I'm excited to be working with Reese and Academy XI. Were you going to do this plug? Because I've been waiting the whole time. We're offering a new Designing a Social Enterprise Bootcamp this weekend over 2 days, which will combine kind of all the startup science that Academy XI bring to the table, as well as the kind of experience in social change and theories of change that Reese obviously has in his role as the innovation strategist, and some of the practical skills around telling stories and inspiring people to support you that I guess I've learnt over 5 years of supporting thousands of enterprises to launch through crowdfunding. So you people who put your hand up earlier that you have an idea that you're keen to get off the ground, would love to see you along this weekend.
Great. I will just mention on Sally's point about tech for good, that Y Combinator, who are the biggest or the most well-known startup accelerator in the US in Silicon Valley, after the Trump election, announced that they were going to be focusing their attention on supporting startups who were going to fix the mess that created the Trump train wreck. And that means they're going to be working with startups from who can fix fake news, who are fixing jobs automation, and who are going to be fixing politics. And I thought that was a really impressive development that was happening in the States. And so if anyone's got a startup idea in that space, then check out Y Combinator and see how they might be able to help you. But on that note, I'm just going to say thank you to the panel for being amazing. Round of applause again for the panel.